Our panel discussion this afternoon is with our three panelists who are sitting here, and I'm very pleased to have them with us this afternoon. The format for the presentation will consist of some brief introductions by the panelists along with some images, and then we will open it up for question and answer for the audience, and that will essentially drive much of this discussion. Afterwards, there will be a book signing for all of the books that Charles, not all, but many of the books that Charles has contributed to, including Dreamland, and this one that he and Julian collaborated on, Exodus Exodo. We have both of these books in the bookstore up by the front desk, and they will be available for signing. After the panel presentation, Alice will give her talk at 5:30 right here in this space. So we will have a short break after this panel discussion is over with, and then you're welcome to come back and listen to the artist herself speak about her work. To my immediate left is M.Molloy, who is the reference and research librarian at New Mexico State University in Las Cruces, who specializes in Latin American studies and U.S.-Mexican border issues. Since 2008, she has managed the Frontera List, which you can find online at fronteralist.org, a daily accounting of the deaths in Juarez and the biographical details of the victims were available, culled from various newspapers, including El Diario and other reports coming out of Ciudad Juarez. It's a unique and valuable resource that many journalists and scholars have used over the years and has gained attention through national and international media. Molly has been interviewed, for example, by the Wall Street Journal, NPR, and in these Times online magazine. She has collaborated with Chuck, editing the book El Sicario, Confessions of a Cartel Hitman, and the film El Sicario Room 164, which is now on display in association with the exhibition upstairs. A powerful film that you should not miss, and I recommend it highly. Next to her, or a little further on, is Charles at the end there. And Charles is a writer, essayist, journalist, and he's been writing about Juarez for over 15 years now. He is the critically acclaimed author of a dozen books, including Murder City, Ciudad Juarez, and the Global Economy's New Killing Fields, Down by the River, A Shadow in the City, Confessions of an Undercover Drug Warrior, Blood Orchid, Some of the Dead Are Still Breathing, and several collaborations, including Inferno with the photographer Michael Berman, which I happen to have right here, and with Julian, the other book that I showed, Exodus, Exodo, and of course this one here, Dreamland, with Alice Leora Briggs. Chuck received the Lannan Literary Award for Nonfiction and the Sidney Hillman Journalism Award in 1996. He was awarded the Southwest Book Award in 2006 and 2010. And also in 2012, he received the United States Artist Fellowship Grant for Artistic Excellence. Bowden is a contributing writer for Mother Jones, and his work frequently appears in Harper's Magazine, GQ, the New York Times Book Review, Aperture, and many others. And in the middle, we have Julian Cardona, who was born in Zacatecas, Mexico, but he migrated to Juarez as a young child. He attended school in Juarez and received his vocational training and worked as a technician in the maquiladoras. And he started a photojournalism career shortly after that for a couple of newspapers in Juarez. And in 1995, he organized a group exhibition in Juarez called Nada que ver, Nothing to See, which was featured in Harper's Magazine. And photographs from this exhibition inspired the award-winning book, Juarez, The Laboratory of Our Future. His photographs taken inside foreign-owned factories in Juarez were also featured in Aperture issue 159 in the year 2000. Cardona's work has been exhibited in a number of U.S. venues, including the Houston Photo Fest in 1998, and in lines of sight, views of the U.S.-Mexican border at the University of California, Riverside, Santa Cruz, and Merced, and in photography, Past, Forward, Aperture at 50 at Sotheby's, New York in January of 2003, and in the golden anniversary publication of the same title. In 2004, he received the Cultural Freedom Fellowship awarded by the Lannan Foundation in Santa Fe, New Mexico. All of these panelists, I should say, have worked with Alice throughout her experience in Juarez. They have been her collaborators, her guides, and supporters for her work from 2007 to the present. They are an essential component of the exhibition in the wake of Juarez, upstairs in the Clinton Adams Gallery, and so I'm very proud to present the three of them to talk to you. So please welcome Molly, Julian, and Chuck.
Well, the first part of this is telling you a little bit about Juarez. You may know Juarez has been for 3 years in a row the most violent city on earth. Starting on 2008, President Calderon ordered the military and the federal police to get into the city, and since then we have had more than 11,000 murders in the city. Also, since then we have started to see another kind of crimes in the city, extortion and kidnapping. Also, there's new things like housejacking. Somebody gets into your house, a group of armed men, and get everything you have inside your home. This series of pictures are intended to just show you some of the some very little part of the thousands of houses and businesses abandoned in the city. According to the university and some other local university and some other studies, more than 117,000 houses remain abandoned in the city. Of them, about 32,000 businesses and houses are vandalized. More than 250,000 people have fled the city. And these pictures you are going to see now were taken during the past few years in the Juarez Valley and in Ciudad Juarez. This particular picture is of a house burned down in the Juarez Valley. A man was killed in that place during 2009, 2010, 2011. The Juarez Valley became a very dangerous place. People started to flee their own town to avoid violence. And the rest of the city was suffering similar fate in the Juarez Valley. You are going to see places of restaurants, any kind of businesses that are suffering extortion, and many abandoned houses about people who were suffering kidnapping or even extortion also in many cases. I won't add any comments to the picture, just to let you see the details. Well, Molly is next. Before she comes, I will have to add that since in 2010, the number of killings per day were 9.9. Just to give you an idea of the violence in the city. And also I will have to add some other ideas after seeing these pictures. This war has been explained by the government and in many cases by media, international media and local media, as a war between cartels. You have seen the houses. They don't look like rich houses. And that's one of the things that I would like to point out about these pictures. The other things is we have had 10,000 soldiers at the highest point of the military station. And I will just put these facts before Molly comes and keeps going with her presentation. Thank you.
I call this our daily massacre, not because I want to make fun of anyone's prayers or to try to make light of what's been going on in Juarez, because it's an actual, quite accurate way to assess what has happened. And as you look at some of the images in this little presentation, and I know I don't follow the rules for presentations, there's way too much text on that screen, but this is an actual translation of the story that I got the title from. Our Daily Massacre is the way that headline is translated. And in the kind of sort of strange irony that some journalists in Juarez use, he pointed out that the 4 young men killed in this incident were trying to cash in on the business of death in the city by rehabbing a little funeral parlor and selling coffins. And you can see there some of the quotes from people at the scene of the crime talking about as they confront policemen, if you're not going to do your job, you might as well get the fuck out of here. Basically, out of the 11,000 homicides that have occurred in Juarez over the past 6 years, probably 95% of them have never been investigated at all, much less a person punished and put in prison for the crime. Children witness these events every single day. And if you think that most of the victims are cartel criminals, note that the man who was killed in this incident was stealing doors from some of those abandoned buildings that Julian showed you. So probably he was not really raking in the cash from selling drugs or some other lucrative item, but rather he was stealing furniture and other things from abandoned houses in order to get a little bit of money to, who knows, probably buy drugs. Just a few other images. I steal all my images from the newspaper because I'm not a very good photographer. And also, Julian can certainly tell you, it's not easy to get to these crime scenes and take the kinds of pictures that newspaper photographers in Juarez take. It's very frightening, very scary, and very, very dangerous. We'll get to some more journalism news maybe in a minute. These were all kids, people under the age of 20 who were killed in this incident in 2011. One of the girls screamed, "Please don't kill me," and then they heard the shots. These are the kinds of things that, appear in the headlines daily. This is El Cholito, a drawing by Alice that is in the exhibit upstairs. And this is the little translated news story that she used as an inspiration for that drawing. Note that this young man died in 2008 when Alice did this drawing. The picture at the top is from yesterday. another young man shot down. The newspaper photographs have often lately been slightly altered. You can see that the boy's head has been digitally erased there. He was killed by a concrete block hitting him in the head. The boy at the bottom was from, February of 2011. This was when we had the big cold snap in the border region. We had temperatures down below zero for several days in a row. You can see from the headline, not even the cold holds them back. 4 people were killed yesterday. But I think it's interesting if you look at Alice's picture of El Cholito, which she drew from imagination. There was not a picture of this young man as I recall. But in this case, life looks to be imitating art in a way. This is from 2011, October actually. The body was dismembered and the killers scattered the pieces all around the city. Notice they list all the different neighborhoods where parts of this particular person were found. And in this case, I just picked something that I had from Alice's emails of some of her drawings. And this is also upstairs in the exhibit in the Abecedario de Juarez. Just a few other ones. This one is one of those shocking ones of severed heads displayed to frighten people, to supposedly announce the new cartel de Juarez appearing. No one ever is certain who displays these things. No one is ever certain who does the killings. But the media tends to take these as actual declarations and, basically signed confessions from whoever the killers are, without asking any questions. Here's another one. This was in 2012, the year when everything was supposed to have ended in Juarez as far as violence. This is the cover of the book that Charles and I worked on, featuring the testimony of a man who, for about 20 years, beginning in the 1980s, did killings at the behest of the Juarez cartel. He was also a state policeman. He did these 2 jobs simultaneously, and he talks about how the system works. The reason I wanted to mention that is in the book, and actually in the film that's showing upstairs, he describes precisely how a person would be assassinated in a car to be sure that he would be killed. And he draws a picture that's precisely like this photograph from the newspaper from October 2011. I guess that's more of reality imitating some kind of art. This is a picture of a man who was picked up and beaten. This was in November of last year. The only thing that makes him extraordinary is that he survived. He was beaten and left for dead by the policemen who attacked him, and they were beating him in order to have him confess that he had drugs hidden in his house. When he said he didn't, they just kept beating him and then finally dumped him in a ditch. But he happened to crawl out and go to the hospital and told the story. This is Julian taking a picture inside one of the first mass killings in Juarez that happened during this period. This was in August of 2008. 9 people were murdered in this little room here. And Chuck and Julian and I went there about 36 hours, I believe, after the killings had happened, while the people were still cleaning the place up. This is just a screenshot of a story that we did. You can see those items on the wall there. Those were, I think, 10 Commandments or something like that. They were motivational messages to the addicts. And also, this is the testimony from Socorro Garcia, who was the young woman. She was an evangelical pastor who was preaching to these addicts when the killers stormed in and killed them. Julian actually did this interview with Socorro Garcia, and I translated it. It was very compelling. Most people that witness these incidents don't talk. Well, most of them don't survive, but this young woman did talk about it, and we're very lucky to have her testimony. Oh, the other thing, she did clearly state that the men who did the killings were dressed like army soldiers. And we actually, when we went there, noticed that the rehab center was about maybe a mile away from the main military cuartel in Juarez, and at that time there were many soldiers, at least 5,000 or 8,000 soldiers in the city. And all of the eyewitnesses that were initially interviewed for the stories in the newspaper said that there was a truckload of soldiers at the end of the street, basically about 100 yards from where the killings happened. The eyewitnesses also said that the automatic rifle fire went on for 15 minutes. I've never, seldom heard rifle fire except in the movies. But to imagine 15 minutes of it, very, very close to where you are, and no one came and no one did anything. In fact, the survivors of this shooting who were wounded were mostly taken to hospital in private vehicles because it took ambulances an hour to get there. This is another one of the items that we took from that room, the Serenity Prayer, and Alice turned it into this work of art. And it didn't stop. That was just the first one, where 9 people were killed. In 2009, another one was attacked and about 18 people were killed. Another one happened in 2010 with another 15 or 16 people killed. This is another photograph from the newspaper of the mother of a young man who was killed in one of those incidents. He was 16 years old. You can tell from this house, well, the lady says it right there, this was a quote in the newspaper, "We're poor, we have no money, we chose the cheapest. And now we still owe 6,000 pesos to the funeral home." This is another of Alice's drawings from that photograph, inspired by that photograph. The lady had gone to the center to try to take her son out of it the day before this happened. But the director wouldn't let him go because they thought he would go back to take drugs again, so she didn't get her son back ever. This is my new favorite from Alice. This is former President Calderon. And I've been using this quote from Calderon. This was done on CNN in May of 2010. And it was a very funny interview. Wolf Blitzer says, "So are you sure that all of these, that 90% of these people are criminals?" And Calderon said 90%, and Wolf Blitzer said 90%? And Calderon said, "Yes, 90%. I mean, it went back and forth like that for a couple of minutes. It was really, I mean, it's horrible, but it was also quite funny. And he's on the record. And that's not the only time. But when you look at the character or the poverty of the huge majority of the victims, and then sort of contrast that with Calderon's declarations, I think it's fairly stark. And these are the numbers. This is what I'm famous for and always bore audiences to tears with. So I won't really talk about them. They're up there. You can look at them. The worst violence was definitely in 2010. The violence is definitely down this year. The murders have been somewhere between 1 and 2 per day so far in 2011. But these kinds of numbers add up very, very quickly. And since 2007, more than 11,000 people have been murdered in Juarez. This is what it looks like on a graph. I had to have help to do this from somebody who's better at Excel than I am. But you can see this is all the way from January 2008 through December 2012, month to month.
It's going down.
And you can see the high point was October 2010, and when almost 360 people were murdered. It's now down to about 30 or 35 per month. most of us, if we just looked at the media and academic writing, we would think that the only people killed in Juarez are women. Women actually make up slightly less than 10% of the total number of people killed during all of these years, going back all the way to 1993. But femicide, or the murders of women for gender-related, in a sexually explicit, sexually exploitative way, has become the thing that most people know about Juarez. And most people ignore the other 90% of the people who are killed, who are men. This is what a graph of the female homicides compared to the total looks like. And as you notice, when the violence spiked in Juarez in 2008, the split between the two went way down. Instead of 10%, women made up only about 5 or 6% of the total. I think that's because in any kind of war situation, most of the victims are young men. And that's certainly been true of Juarez all the time. Most of the female victims during all of those years prior were domestic violence victims. They were murdered by someone they knew. Interestingly, in the United States, I just looked at statistics. I've also looked at them for several US cities that kind of are comparable to Juarez in size, like Philadelphia. But in most cases, in the US, about 22 to 25% of homicide victims in any year are female. Murder rates, this is more boring stuff. To compare cities and places in murder, you have to compare related to population. So the number they do is per 100,000. At one point in 2010, the estimated murder rate in Juarez was close to 300 per 100,000. I like to think, I live in Las Cruces, which is a town of about 100,000 people, and imagining what the town would be like if 300 people had been killed there in 1 year. And it's impossible, I think, for most Americans to imagine this, unless we've lived in a war zone somewhere in the world. You can see the comparisons. This is a chart that's much better than the ones I make. This was done by the Wall Street Journal, and they actually had to add up all the murders in all of these US cities for 2009 in order to add up to the murders in Juarez. There were, I think, a total of about 20 million, almost 21 million people in that combination of US cities. Nationally in Mexico, the murder rate is also going up, and the numbers, the raw numbers of homicides are extraordinary. This is just adding up all of the years from 2007 through 2012. We don't have an actual completed estimate nationally for Mexico for 2012. Some people think it could be as high as 30,000. Other estimates are that it's gone down slightly from the 27,000 in 2011. But basically, just adding up the raw numbers of murders from this Mexican statistical agency, INEGI, over 125,000 people have been killed in Mexico since the beginning of 2007. And these are just US numbers for comparison. The US, as you know, is 3 times the population of Mexico. So this is another, I'm really bad at math, but I can do this simple kind of arithmetic. Basically, Juarez accounts for 1% of the Mexican population, and it accounted for about 9% of the homicides during all those years. I put that X there because I had to multiply and divide to do it. And we really don't know how many people have been killed because many people never come to light. Their bodies are dumped in mass graves. They have concrete poured over them. They are buried in places where they will probably never be found. Sometimes they are found and they're counted, but when they're counted, they never get added into the statistics. This is something that Mexican journalists have noted frequently because nobody knows exactly when they were killed, so they don't know where to put them in the statistics. This has come out very recently. This was one of the articles that was in the US press, that the missing estimates are 25,000 to 27,000. A later number from Mexico said it was actually closer to 27,500. But in any case, these are people that have been reported disappeared by their families or other people, other loved ones of some kind. And their bodies have never been found, so no one knows exactly what happened to them. This is one of my, I think, a key article that came out in the Juarez press in 2011. Sandra Rodriguez is a real investigative reporter. She gathered through the Mexican FOIA, or what is like the FOIA in Mexico, over 3,000 homicide case files from the state attorney general from Juarez, and found that in only 2% of these murder cases were there weapons near the bodies of the murder victims, meaning that they were shot when they were probably completely unarmed. So this is another thing that really belies Calderon's notion that this is a war between drug cartels. Most people who have been killed in Juarez have been shot in cold blood or hit over the head with a rock. But basically, most of them have been killed by gunfire, and they were unarmed at the time they were murdered. And that's never been reported in the U.S. press that I know of, other than a couple of times when Chuck and I have written it and said it. But it's never been reported in a major newspaper in the U.S. Just yesterday, I have a whole other thing I could talk about journalism in Mexico. This is from yesterday. A website, internet journalist was killed in Ojinaga, which is a smaller town just east of Juarez in Chihuahua State. The website was immediately taken offline. I had it open, and so we made a screenshot to preserve it. And actually just today, I saw it. I don't have you're going to be spared a picture. But the police chief of Juarez made a statement to a gathering saying that, what did he say? How was it stated, Julian? Oh yeah, that journalists who try to report on this stuff are digging their own grave. I mean, it was a very kind of blatant warning, and there's a lot of, the reporters were the punto negro, the black spot in the city, which is of course trying to overcome its image as a violent place. Oh well. Speaking of those case files that Sandra went through, 3,000 of them. Imagine, these are boxes of evidence at the morgue in Juarez. Imagine that multiplied by 11,000 plus murder cases. I'm a librarian. I deal with boxes of books, archives, other things, trying to imagine the record that really does not exist. But if it did, what kind of archive it would require to hold it is kind of frightening. Another of my favorites from Alice. This is a new one, I think. But the term limpieza social is something that is very often used in Latin American media or press or writing. And it's almost never used in the United States. Social cleansing. Do we ever talk about this as anything that actually happens? Well, this is a direct quote from the president, former President Calderon. He was giving a speech at a military graduation ceremony, I believe, in December 2011. And he said that the criminals are cockroaches and animals that have infected the country and can only be eliminated through social cleansing. This is another way of saying these people deserve to die. These are people that we don't want in our society. And I believe it makes it a lot easier for them to be murdered. In the same way that Police Chief Lezaola's statement today is probably going to make it easier for more reporters to be killed. You saw this photo already. This is one of the ones that Julian showed you from the Valle de Juarez. Those murder rates are astounding for Juarez, upwards of 300 during 2010. But interestingly, in the Valle de Juarez, which is a very small place, towns of 2,000 or 3,000 people, it's estimated that the murder rate there is over 2,000 per 100,000 because of the numbers that have been killed in some of these small towns. Many of them have had about 10% of the people murdered, and many, many of the other people have fled. It's essentially a scorched earth zone now. And this is something that Charles wrote back in 1996 after one of his first visits to Juarez, and I don't believe that this is the least bit out of date today. Especially that part about being ignored by the U.S. government and its citizens. And this is another of Julian's photographs, which happened at the very beginning of the violence, only in March of 2008, when 117 people were murdered. We could not imagine a city that would murder 100 people, more than 100 people in 1 month. And it only proceeded to get worse from that point forward. And that's it.
I'm here to be Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, I guess. Give you a little note of hope. But one of the arguments that Julian and I have had from time to time, I get better, is whether Juarez is dying. He thinks it's dying because the city he was raised in is being exterminated. I have a feeling that something worse is happening, and something new is being born, or something different. But the reason I don't think it's dying is because people are incredibly resilient. Actually, what I noticed in the photographs that Julian didn't comment on, so I'll tell you what they mean, is in several of them you see dogs by these burned out buildings. Those dogs are there because their owners have been kidnapped and probably murdered. And they're waiting with hope for their owners to come back. The other thing I noticed is you look at burned out houses, the trees are starting to green up next to them. Yes, I did do drugs when I was younger, but I believe in hope. I'll give you an example. In September 1939, the German military destroyed 10% of Warsaw, Poland. On April 19, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising began. 500,000 Jews had been herded into a square mile. They had a ration of about 200 calories a day. For 30 days, the Jews fought. Almost none survived, and those were instantly massacred. The Germans didn't leave a single wall standing. And later, the Poles bulldozed the rubble into piles, put dirt on it to make home lots. On August 1st, 1944, the Soviet army approached Warsaw, and the Polish people rose up in hope. That battle went on for 63 days. The Soviet army sat outside the city as the Poles fought and the Germans murdered them. The resistance fighters were killed, and the civilian population, all of it, was expelled. 85% of that city was destroyed. 170,000 Poles were murdered. When the Soviet army entered, and finally in January 1945, 700,000 residents of Warsaw were dead. Now in 1931, the population had been 2.4 million. After the war, some Poles thought Warsaw should never be rebuilt, that the sea of death, rubble, should be kept as a monument to that war. One Polish writer wrote at the time of the ruin, "This must not be touched, but it stands just as it is. We who love the city, we wanted to love its scattered bricks, but they couldn't do it." Within days, people began to re-enter the city. They started just, with no supervision, clearing rubble out of the streets. They started living in ruins. There's a famous photograph of a woman sitting with her 2 children at a table in an apartment only doesn't have any damn walls, you know? And she's got food on the table and they're having lunch, exposed to the elements. The Warsaw that had existed since the 9th century was ripped right out of its new grave. The old medieval core was totally rebuilt. It was an exact replica. This one guy that lived there when he was a kid hated it because every damn day he looked out his bedroom window and saw a lantern on the other medieval wall dangling. When he went back after the war, the lantern had been restored dangling. Well, this is what human beings are. Today the city's got a population of 1.7 million, and the metro is 2.6 million, pretty much what it was in 1931. Now, Ciudad Juarez isn't Warsaw. The killers haven't been the German army or the Soviet army, and the devastation hasn't been nearly as great. Nor has a group like the Jews been targeted and exterminated. But we're talking about a wounded place. We're talking about a city that for several years was the most violent place on this planet. And we're talking about a community that it's over centuries deep, over 350 years. People have been at that crossing. Now, you're New Mexicans. The wood for the first bridge across the Rio Grande there in the 18th century was hauled down from Santa Fe to join it. Now, here's what we got. We look at a wall. Now we look at 20,000 agents on the line. Now we try not to look at all of what you just saw, except with drones buzzing around in the sky. Now we're all here because of Alice's work. She promised dinner too, but yeah. And this work's on the walls because it was brought into being by the pain of Juarez. It's not about an imagined thing. Think it is about, it's about a city that hundreds of thousands of people have fled. But a third of the housing has been abandoned. 40 to 50% of the stores have slammed shut. Half its teenagers aren't in school right now and don't have jobs. There's 900 gangs of this. And all this while, the United States did nothing but send guns to the Mexican army. All this while, the United States talked about a big lie, a despicable lie, that violence was spilling across the border. All this death and despair, and all we've got to show to prove our caring selves is a big new goddamn wall. Now, I'm not an expert on Juarez, and I'm not an artist, praise the Lord. But I've become an expert on fear, because I have lived on the border, and I've watched my fellow citizens create a threat to national security out of poor people migrating north to survive. I've watched my fellow citizens create a huge criminal industry because they like consuming drugs and won't legalize them. And I've watched them finance and own factory after factory in Juarez that doesn't pay a living wage. And by that I mean nobody in this room could work there 6 days a week and be alive on those wages. You could not survive. You couldn't get enough calories, you couldn't get enough water, you couldn't get shelter from the elements. Now Juarez, one of the things Julian didn't mention, or M.Molloy, in the 90s was a poster child for free trade. It boasted less than 1% unemployment. This is the model of the future that the United States government and the Mexican government and economists, whom we all know are born brain dead, proposed for all of us. And it created a living hell, which he captured and was Alice was drawn about. And what I've also seen is nobody accept any responsibility in this country for the violence and crime that's resulted. I've watched them, as I said, decry violence spilling across the border, especially the most gutless people in our society, the members of the House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, and every goddamn governor on the border. But Jesus Christ, Texas has a governor, when a bomb went off in Juarez, claimed it went off in Texas. Apparently they don't teach geography anymore either. Look at, it's got 100,000 dead Mexicans. We've got at least 27,000 have vanished. And trust me, they're not in a resort somewhere. They're dead. They're never coming back. If you go, you don't come back. Well, Alice Leora Briggs has brought us back the feel of this world that we don't seem willing to face. It's on the walls of this building upstairs, red walls as it happened. And this is a chance to learn what 100,000 dead Mexicans already know. I read last week that more than 65 years after the end of World War II, scholars have finally determined that under the Third Reich, there were 42,500 camps for extermination and forced labor. No one knows how many secret burying grounds have been created in Mexico recently. Now, I met a guy once that had personally hidden 250 bodies. I once was talking to DEA intelligence. I know that's a contradiction in terms. And they boasted they had maps in their intelligence center of secret burial grounds all over Mexico. But they don't want to scare the horses, I guess, by letting anybody else know. But what I know is you can get a sense of these things from the passions rolling off the drawings on those walls upstairs. Let's make something clear, or I'll make it clear. What prompted these drawings is not a narrative, not a discourse, not an interpretation, not any of this postmodernist lingo that's gutless crap. What prompted these drawings is murder on a huge scale, in our lifetime, on our watch. The beer is almost still cold if you drive here and go to Juarez. Now, we can explain to ourselves until the bars close tonight that it's not our responsibility, that's not our business. Yeah, we can say we feel deep sympathy. How could all those good Germans know about 42,500 goddamn camps murdering people around them? I guess they had earmuffs on. But we can demand more troops on the border, and we can put more roadblocks on our highways. Trust me, we can get past this. We have so far. Well, look, I want to leave you with 4 ideas I didn't originate. Other people have good ideas, not often, but a few. And I'll read them out loud to you. In future days, which we will seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon these 4 essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression, everywhere in the world. The second freedom is the freedom of every person to worship God in his own way, everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy peacetime life for its inhabitants, everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point, in such a thorough fashion, that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world. Now, that was the President of the United States in 1941. I think it's time for us to step back up to the plate. Now, as I understand it, you get to ask questions now, and we 3 of us will take turns inventing whys. So, let's go for it.